Casting.
All right, 2 minutes.
I think it's one.
So we're welcoming everybody here. We know some people are just coming in to this Facebook Live. If you are just coming in, you can put in the chat box your name and where you're tuning in from, and say hello to everybody else who's with us here in this Facebook Live. We're in Oakland, California, and we'll get going in just a moment. Welcome to everybody coming in. Give your you want to put your greeting in the comments section, which is on the right hand side of your screen, and just say who you are and where you're calling from, where you're tuning in from. Welcome, Donna, and from Texas. Welcome, Susan.
Got a few comments. Got some folks from Philly and Chicago. Christine from Yellow Springs. That's somebody I know. Works at Antioch.
Jeff from Bellingham, Susan from Seattle, John from Des Moines. Well, welcome everyone. We'll get started. We'll start introducing ourselves. And my name is John Lindsay-Poland, and I am a co-director of the California Healing Justice Program in Oakland, California.
Yeah, and I'm Chris Chavers, and I am the Ristad Fellow at AFSC.
Also from the California Healing Justice Program.
Yes.
Thanks so much. So some background for you all. The American Friends Service Committee Healing Justice Program has been working on policing for a long time, and of course, police militarization in this country has a very, very long history, and depending on what you mean. But we could go back over a century to when the drug wars in this country first started, and in the South, there was the propaganda was that when African Americans used cocaine, that they were the bullets didn't work on them. The bullets of the regular caliber didn't work on them. So Southern sheriffs lobbied to increase the firepower and caliber of the revolvers they carried to 38s, which then became standard. And that's how militarization gets normalized. It's always on a racist trope, and it's always based on the idea that, well, we need greater firepower in order to fight some threat. In this country also, in the last 20 years, the growth of SWAT teams has been enormous. SWAT teams and SWAT operations, which use all kind of militarized equipment, some of it coming directly from the military and some of it that they obtain in other ways. Then most people's awareness of this became much more prominent, especially people outside impacted communities, with the Ferguson uprising in 2014 and the response to it, where we saw images of tanks and assault weapons and all kinds of militarized gear. At that point, then President Obama issued an executive order to review the military equipment that was going to police around the country, and what was called the 1033 program, which issues military equipment from the Department of Defense, and issued an executive order to put restrictions on that banned some equipment going to police, like tracked tanks and like bayonets and grenade launchers. And then other equipment they still gave to police, but they put a control on it so that there would be civilian oversight, because civilian elected officials were out of the loop in what police departments were obtaining from the Pentagon. In California, there was legislation introduced, and that executive order was then rescinded by President Trump in 2017. So it went back to the same kind of grant making. In 2018 in California, we had proposed legislation, AB 3131, that would have controlled all types of militarized equipment going to police departments and sheriff's departments all over the state. It went all the way through the legislature and then was vetoed by then Governor Brown. So here in the Bay Area, for the last year, we've been working with community partners on 2 ordinances that would control the type of equipment that police departments get, particularly in Oakland and in Berkeley. And these are not radical proposals at all. They're proposals to give oversight and transparency for the type of equipment that police are acquiring and that they already have and that they're using, but don't report on that use. So Chris and I have been working on this process as both of these cities have police commissions that have been considering these proposed ordinances. So maybe we can talk now about what that experience has been like.
Yeah, I think one of the takeaways that I think we've discussed, John, is this savior complex that really is invested in, deeply ingrained within the police department, and that's within America in general, and that this ordinance, as you said, is not radical. It's not even the slightest bit of a radical ordinance, but it's something that provides that oversight and transparency, but yet police departments, and in particular the ones that we have been working with, are so against having even the bare minimum and the baseline, and really providing what it should feel, safety and resources and information that should automatically be invested within the community. And they're very set on not investing those resources. And so that has been a very frustrating and trial and tribulation that we've had to go through thus far with the ordinance.
Yeah, both Chris and I have been sitting in on these meetings. Sometimes we're the only community members sitting in on the meetings. It's a subcommittee of a city commission that's considering an 8-page ordinance, and it's really digging down into the details. Yeah. And of course, the devil is in the details, right?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I think you were commenting the other night about one of those pieces of resistance that you described was around mutual aid, and maybe you can tell people what mutual aid is and what kind of resistance we got.
Yeah, so the mutual aid is something that is within the ordinance, because when, for instance, for examples, when you have protests, even peaceful protests, you'll have police departments bring in other agencies. And right now, the police department that we've been having to go up against, they don't want the mutual aid to be put in there, because they want essentially for when other agencies come within those particular situations, they don't want them to have to listen to their use of force policies, their regulations on equipment or not. And their argument, and the argument that they've been presenting, is that if they have all those restrictions and all those guidelines, then people aren't going to come to when they need them to. These other agencies aren't going to come and show up. And it kind of, it's redundant and kind of contradictory, because you make these policies and things and you put these in place for your police department to follow them. And so why would it be a stretch for you to want other people who are coming within the community that you're supposed to protect to follow those same guidelines? And so there's been huge resistance around that. And there's, and that's their argument. Their argument is that they feel as though that they're going to lose out on having other agency be able to come and help protect the city. But in other words, when these protests and these things happen, it really affects particular communities, which are normally marginalized Black and Brown community members. And they are the ones who have to suffer the consequences when other agencies come in. And it's not theory talk, right? They try to frame it as, we talk in theory a lot, but in actuality, this is a reality situation that happens for Black and Brown community members within their own community.
Yeah, people think of Berkeley and Oakland as being really progressive.
Yeah.
But the data show that both Oakland PD and Berkeley PD, their stops of people there's huge racial disparities in who they stop, but also who they charge. Like, basically, if they stop a Black person, they're less likely to find a crime than if they stop a white person, and yet they're stopping Black people at a much higher rate. So when we think about that for stops, these are not necessarily using like big ass militarized equipment. When the military equipment gets used, it's most likely to have that same kind of racial disparity. One of the things that's in the chat is a study by the American Civil Liberties Union that showed that SWAT raids are much more likely. They're much more likely to be to serve search warrants, and they're much more likely to be in households of color than in white households. And that's true. That's all over the country. And people often, like in what happened in Ferguson or earlier this year, they see this equipment when there's protests, right? They see the guys who are firing tear gas. I think we've lost Chris for a moment for some reason. Hopefully he'll come back in. When batons are used or armored vehicles are brought out in protests, we see that. We see it in the news, and the news media reports it. But when SWAT raids occur, those things are not reported. They're not visible. And they're much more likely to be in neighborhoods and in households of people of color. And so a lot of what we're trying to do with this ordinance is that not only during protests, but during SWAT raids, there's reporting on when is this equipment being used? And what are the use policies for that equipment? So that there's a civilian community approved policy, or the community has the opportunity to say, no, we don't want that equipment in our community under any circumstance. Or it might be for this really, really narrow circumstance, but only for that. And on general, the law enforcement does not want to hand that conversation over to the community at all. They want to be able to control and say, no, we're going to determine when this has to be used. And unfortunately, it's used, unequally and also excessively.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that brings us to talking about the town hall that we are doing and working with so many organizations. I don't even think I could list them all, but a lot of organizations. We're working on a town hall in Oakland, and it's about demilitarization and the use of force policy within Oakland. And we're going to be going over a bunch of campaigns, including our ordinance that we've been working on as well.
Mm-hmm. And I want to, the information on that town hall is in the chat. Yes. I want to invite people to submit, comments and questions in the chat. I see from Debbie Southern that In Chicago, SWAT teams are deployed often during mental health crises.
Yeah.
So there you have like at least a triple issue, right? Because you've got the militarized equipment, which can be very traumatizing as it is. You have it more likely to be used in a neighborhood of color, and someone who's going through a mental health crisis, who that's like the least thing that they need in order to help them in their crisis. So yeah,
Yeah, I
thanks.
mean, we see the policing, right? The policing, the homelessness rates within the Bay Area in general, but in Berkeley and Oakland, it's absolutely obscene. And then you see the way that the police really targets the homeless community, and on top of within the homeless community, the Black and brown marginalized folks that are in there. And so you have those intersectionalities that really play a part.
And I want to also call attention. Chris mentioned this town hall in Oakland that we're doing
Yeah.
next Thursday. No, sorry, next Wednesday. But next Thursday is another in a series that AFSC is organizing nationally of conversations about policing. We had a kind of an introduction to abolition of policing a couple weeks ago, and then next Thursday we're going to have one that's focused on police-free schools. In the new year, in January and February, we'll have more national conversations. One of which is about responding to emergencies and crises without police, without separating 911 police response from other kinds of non-police response, where that's really the best thing, which is in so many of the situations that police are responding to, it doesn't deserve someone with a gun and a badge at all.
Yeah.
And then also another one on militarization, and one on surveillance, and one on restorative justice, because there are many conflicts, where there is a need for intervention, but not an armed intervention, right? And restorative justice offers a really important set of tools, and not just in schools. Like restorative justice is used a lot in schools, but it can be used in many other contexts too.
See, Debbie here says, very curious to know what would be within the purview and if they'd actually be able to maintain separation from police. Keep us updated.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's a real debate that in Oakland, there's a project called Macro, and there's also another project called Mental Health First, which
Yeah.
are each using different kinds of models for how to respond, particularly to mental health crises without police. So Macro is using 911 and working with the dispatchers to try and divert the response, so it's not a law enforcement response. It's entirely a clinician and social worker response, because so many of them, there's a huge volume of 911 calls. And then Mental Health First is working on a totally separate track from the 911 system, and it's community run and community funded, in order to respond to mental health crises with people from the community, from the neighborhood. So we're working on both those models here.
Joy asks, do you have PERT teams in the Bay Area, the psychiatric emergency response teams? I don't know.
So there are, I don't know of anything called that.
Yeah.
But the county behavioral health, Alameda County Behavioral Health, has just put into practice an emergency response team that I believe they have psychiatric professionals in those response teams, at least clinicians, so that one of the things that happens now is that for someone to be involuntarily hospitalized, they have to be a threat to themselves or others. That can only be done by police. And the authority, we want that authority to be with mental health personnel too. Not that they would necessarily be involuntarily treated, but that the response would be from mental health personnel, and so that it can be resolved without that same kind of trauma.
Yeah. Any more questions? Because I think we only have a few more.
A minute or two more. So there's one here: de-escalation skills are not only lacking, but if police But if police is arguably not even the most appropriate social service responder. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is why so many cities want to, when we talk about defund the police, we're talking about moving resources out of police departments and into other agencies. They could be in the local government or they could be in the community in order to respond to conflict or crises or other needs that people have without police, because in the vast majority of cases, that's going to be the most the most effective response, and so that's why we're talking about defunding police.
Absolutely. Hey, yeah, so thank you. My fellowship actually ends December 15th. I came aboard in August. And so, I mean, came aboard and really just got into the ordinance and until John wears 5,000 different hats. And so a lot of different projects and moving pieces. But yeah, it's really good to be here.
And it's been both challenging but also encouraging to
Yeah.
be working on these ordinances in this time. You know, we were working on this before the protests began in May and June,
Yeah.
and this is a really an important time for really transforming the way we understand and carry out community safety.
Yeah.
So, and John Krieg asks what you're doing next.
Yeah, I'm in my last year of my undergraduate, and so I am going to be working on a bunch of homework and classes, and then be graduating in June, and then hopefully after that, maybe a master international, program or something that has to do with going to school for law is what I'm envisioning.
And from the experience we've had, I am absolutely certain you will be making really important
Oh,
contributions along the way. So, yeah.
oh, that's the goal.
Well, thank you all. We will hope to see some of you in these upcoming webinar virtual events. Next Wednesday is the Oakland Youth-led Town Hall on demilitarizing police. And next Thursday is a national conversation hosted by AFSC on cop-free schools. So we'll see you on the road.
Thank you all.